Cleantech Group. Oh, that's much better. All right. My name is Jules, and I'm a director at Cleantech Group. If you're sitting in this room, you're probably very aware of the hype and the buzz surrounding cutting-edge ICT, like blockchain and like AI. In your daily readings, you probably get titles like, blockchain is revolutionizing your industry, or AI is solving all your problems. Or my personal favorite, and winner of the hype bingo, blockchain plus AI equals IoT. But if you're like me and you're reading these articles, you're probably left with more questions than answers. And the main question being, there are all these revolutions going on, but how is that impacting my organization? How is that creating value? How is that creating opportunities and threats for my organization? At the Cleantech Group, our mission is to help large corporates, industrials, utilities, and investors find and connect with the best of global innovation. And so part of the daily job is going beyond the hype, is trying to understand, okay, these technologies are evolving, they're happening, but what value does that bring to our customers, and how can we turn that into opportunities? We typically do that with a 1-2 punch. We start by building a comprehensive data set of publicly available data. So we'll gather data on investments, on M&A, on partnerships happening in a specific field. And we'll derive trends from that. We'll try to understand where the market is going. But then we're actually going and talking to the market, organizing events, roundtables, meetings, interviewing startups and corporates and investors, and trying to understand, okay, are these assumptions that we made with the data correct? Is the hype justified? And where is value being created? We then obviously package that in market intelligence and try to best serve our clients. But so today I'd like to go through this exercise with you on a couple of topics, and we won't be able to dive into too much detail on both, but let's try. We'll try with blockchain, and then with AI, and then kind of broaden it to some recommendations that I think apply to both. So in the blockchain space, we've been active in this space for about 2 years now, trying to help clients scout in the field, better understand the market. And the space has tremendously evolved in just the space of 2 years. When we first looked at it, the intersection between blockchain and energy and industry was really around IoT and supply chain. We had companies like Filament building communication networks based on blockchain protocols. We had companies like ScootChain trying to digitize supply chains and provide inventory financing. Then in 2016, blockchain actually was brought to the core of energy with projects that you're probably very familiar with, so I won't go too much into that, but like the Brooklyn microgrid, that's when actually energy started to get involved and investing in companies like BigChainDB or Share and Charge. And then at the end of the year, a first kind of seed round from a company called Electron that I hope you'll hear a bit more about shortly. But then in 2017 we witnessed a tremendous acceleration in the field, and we saw kind of 3 main movements there. One is corporates getting more and more familiar with the consortium model and kind of being okay with entering those consortia and working together to pilot specific applications. You can see the WF there and Enerchain, the 2 main ones. The second is the traditional VCs that have been playing in our space have been quite timid, and for good reason. The business models are slow to emerge. But we saw a first one kind of taking a big bet with Braemar investing into L03 recently. But if the traditional VCs have been pretty timid, actually the rise of a new category of investment, ICOs or non-dilutive investments, has taken us all by surprise and has brought tremendous amounts of money in a field where kind of VCs were just starting to enter. In parallel with these kind of positive market dynamics, you have a multiplication of use cases throughout the energy value chain. And that's something that, really interestingly enough, started to happen in kind of 2016, 2017. We started the project development phase with companies like Sun Exchange that kind of help crowdfund energy access projects. We then moved down to generation and trading, and you probably see a lot of innovation there. You have some very interesting things around wholesale trading, but also flexibility market, again with probably Electron. We'll hear a bit more about that. And that goes down to transmission, distribution with microgrid that now obviously permeates down to consumption with the rise of the prosumer. But if you have positive market dynamics and use cases multiplying, that doesn't necessarily mean that the production level value is yet obvious. And we organized a private kind of executive summit in Boston a couple of weeks ago with about 80 people in the room, and most of them that were on that kind of deal slide, a couple of slides down. And the idea was, okay, can we get some people in the room to actually talk about, are the business models emerging? Is this really creating value, and for which specific use cases? And the feedback was actually quite mixed, and so I did want to share that today in the spirit of going beyond the hype. One of the main takeaways was, from one of the utilities that has gone through all this experimenting, that has invested in all the startups, it wasn't clear for them what business models were really emerging and what they could really take to production today. Now, obviously, this belief wasn't shared by everyone. Some other large corporates were actually very bullish on the potential, especially in the intersection with IoT. But these are kind of healthy skepticism remarks that are good to keep in mind when looking at this field. So let's pause on blockchain for a minute, switch to AI, and then let's see if we have some common recommendations that work for both. So on the AI side, I'll start by saying very different field, much more mature, much more varied, and that has been kind of sending applications toward our world of energy and industry for quite a while now, but still, pretty much used as a buzzword by a lot of people. And so, again, interesting to kind of dive a little bit deeper and understand where value is being created. Now, obviously, to build our data set, we had to come up with stricter definitions on what is AI and where it applies. For instance, we excluded all the hardware companies that also do AI. So, for instance, all the autonomous vehicle manufacturers came out of that data set. But anyway, so we defined AI meets kind of energy, industry, and as usual with us, mobility, agriculture, water. And came up with a data set of around 120 companies acting at the intersection of AI and energy, and around north of 200 deals. And so in this data set, many use cases, but easily categorized into a few families. One is around autonomous systems, and there obviously you can think about autonomous cars, but you can also broaden that to drones, and maybe eventually whole grids will be operated as autonomous systems. So this is the interesting kind of decision-making part of AI. Then you have the pretty broad kind of industrial predictive maintenance field, again with very different use cases within it, but this idea that leveraging data from connected devices and sensors, you're able to operate physical assets better, and you're able to predict when one is going to fail. Energy and building management, we'll come back to that in a second with the kind of value chain view. And then obviously to a lesser extent, some applications that we're following closely on the water, on the waste side, but represent a lower proportion of the whole today. So the main learning looking at this data set is investment is shooting up. There's no doubt about that. This picture is taken mid-September. We expect the amount of venture capital going in this intersection to hit about $1 billion by the end of the year. And so this is a tremendous rise in this specific field. I won't kind of go into the whole kind of how this translates into specific use cases and into specific stages, but interesting to notice that obviously we're creating a big debt of kind of companies that are going to need kind of later stage financing in a few years. But so again, kind of, we come back to that question, where does this actually create value? And if we take a value chain lens on this, it's interesting to notice that AI is bringing value at each step of the way. So again, starting at the project development stage, we've seen some very interesting companies helping you find the best place to put a distributed generation asset. So this works with wind, and you have a very interesting young startup here based in France. But you could take the same for solar with a Power Scout in the US, for instance, kind of finding leveraging AI and geo models to best place assets. Moving down to generation, here again, one of the main components of the value is how do you make sure these physical assets stay kind of well-maintained and ahead of time. And this company, Spark Ignition, is doing a lot of very interesting work with Invenergy to reduce their downtime in windmill turbines. Moving down to transmission and distribution, again, I put the logo of DeepMind there. We haven't heard much from their partnership with National Grid since I'd say, think about 18 months it's been announced. But hey, leaving it in there if we ever hear something in the next few weeks. And then down to the consumption there, the idea is really how can we make sure building dwellers get a better sense of their consumption and are able to modulate it. And obviously, you've heard a lot of pitches on that topic today. So that's our view of kind of where AI can bring value throughout the chain. Now, again, we've run a number of kind of private roundtables on this topic. And interesting to, again, kind of come back to some of the industry comments, like what are the corporates, what are the investors saying about this technology. And I would say like the biggest learning that I took away from these roundtables is, I think, a lot of people consider that some of the AI that's applied in energy is really not rocket science, that with very simple algorithms, you're able to do 80% of the work. And so a lot of them actually don't really buy the AI as a buzzword. And that was a very interesting learning. The second, I would say, a very interesting comment was on the fact that most of the AI that's put to work in the energy field is actually doing cost reduction and not creating new types of businesses. I'm not sure we agree with this statement, but it was interesting kind of point of view. Obviously, valuations are too high, but then everyone always complains about that. And then the last learning I would say is it's a field where we have seen different investors, different corporates really come at it from their own angles, meaning it's a field where they've successfully found the companies that played in their vertical and were able to kind of develop projects in that field. So industrial companies, great at doing predictive maintenance on specific verticals, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of where it leaves us for AI, and I would say our main message is again some questions on how interesting are some of these algorithms, how disruptive, and then how differentiated. And so I would say our kind of cross-cutting recommendations from looking at some of these different cutting-edge themes, and some that we think can be applied to all, though obviously. Most are just good common sense. One is be ready to invest in the journey, and it's one that we learned from a lot on the blockchain side. Even if sometimes the business models are not yet obvious, all of the utilities that have gone into this field have said that these experiments were very valuable. Building the internal expertise, getting ready for the next disruption was something that was quite valuable, even if they didn't find the kind of production level use cases yet. The second is, and it's one that's related, is don't dismiss incremental value creation. Specifically on the blockchain side, we've seen amazing use cases in replacing just a small bit in the energy value chain compared to the whole kind of big transactive energy topic. And sometimes this, it works better to kind of try something small and get your hands dirty with the technology. The third is be outcome focused and technology agnostic. Again, I'll take a case from blockchain. I don't know if any of you in the room took part in the Enerchain experiment, but talking to them, it was clear that they adopted a platform that was cheap, that was easy to manage on the blockchain side, and that allowed them to run this pilot pretty cheaply compared to others. And so the idea is always start with a specific outcome in mind. Don't try to specifically fit blockchain into it or AI. And once you do, try to find the best, the most relevant technologies within these fields. The fourth would be put a premium on vertical expertise, and there I would say specifically relevant to AI. When a field is not that differentiated, so if you take predictive maintenance today, around 20, 30 companies doing the same things, prioritize the teams that know who they're selling to. And that know their buyers and know how to best extract value from a specific industry. And the last one, and my pet peeve is don't trust black boxes. And it's one that We see a lot of teams hiding behind confidentiality or just not being able to explain an algorithm in simple English terms. And we typically don't think that that's a great sign. It's something that the blockchain industry has brought to our industry is that culture of openness. And we think that that's always a great sign. So that's it. I think I'm exactly on time. And obviously come to speak to us if you want to hear more. Thank you.